In this video, we're going to show you to install the exhaust manifold stud kit on your Jeep Grand Cherokee located on the side of your engine. Before tackling this job, you want to disconnect the battery. Start with the negative terminal using a 13mm socket. Now if your bolt starts to spin, use an open-ended wrench or pliers to hold it. Back the bolt off, give it a twist, and lift it up. We're going to remove our battery tray. In order to do this, we have a few bolts and nuts to remove. We're going to go through this hole on the back side here. Straight down there, you're going to find a nut on a stud. Using your 10mm, go ahead, loosen and remove that nut. I'm going to reach down the back side, grab that. Use your trim tool to this harness right here. Pop up that little plastic button holding that harness in place. Pull that aside. That's going to give you access to the other 10mm bolt right here. On the front side, it's going to be another 10mm bolt. I'm going to go ahead and loosen that. I'm going to use a magnet to grab this one right here. Now in this box right here, there are going to be 4 locking tabs on this here. I'm going to use my flathead screwdriver. And I'm just going to pry out gently, undoing each lock. So I'm going to pry that, lift up. Do the same on this side here. That'll dislodge the front side of this. Do the same for the back. That'll allow you to go ahead and pull up on this here. Now on the back of that box there's going to be a bolt securing the side of the battery tray to the fender well. Go ahead and grab that there. There would normally be a 10mm. Ours happens to be an 8mm on our particular vehicle, but it's normally a 10. I want to pull up on the battery tray itself, wiggle this up. Now on the bottom side here, underneath this button is an electrical connector. You're going to reach around the back side. And on that connector, you're going to feel for the flat side of that connector, pinch it, separate that connector, and then remove your battery tray. Now this right here is that connector. There's a flat side. You're going to be pushing down on that there to disconnect it. Remove this bolt on the back side of this bracket using our swivel and 10mm. Go ahead and put our wrench on this here. Loosen this bolt. Now we just removed the hardware securing our AC accumulator right here, and the lines go back to the firewall back there. Now before we separate these lines here, you want to make sure that you have the system evacuated professionally. You don't want to separate those lines there, leaking the AC system into the atmosphere. That is a bad thing. So you want to make sure that you professionally have the system evacuated. You want to go ahead and separate this now from the firewall. Now we're going to run our extension in with our deep socket. This is a 13mm. And you go right between the 2 AC lines. And there's a nut there. Reach in there, grab that. This here, instead of coming off the stud, the whole stud came out, not a big issue. Now when we separate this unit here, you might have a little hissing noise coming from it. It'll just be the last little bit of pressure coming out of it. That is not terrible. When we do separate it, the lines that come off with the accumulator here, we're going to put some tape over the connections there, as well as the block on the firewall. We want to try and eliminate moisture to getting into the lines as best we can. Gonna lift this up and go ahead and wiggle this off. Use our trim tool down below here to remove this little retainer. Actually, the retainer just opened up for us. Pop that out. And remove this carefully without bending the line. Do the same to this here. I'm just going to use a securing strap here to hold these lines out of the way. Now that we have the lines out of the way, go ahead and put some tape over the receiver dryer unit here. On our particular vehicle, we just have this little securing bracket right here that presses on to the valve cover stud. Pull that off and set it aside. You want to remove the 10mm nuts securing the heat shield to the manifold. There's one on the front side and one on the back side. Now, as rusty as these are, it's able to remove these here with a 1/4-inch ratchet and a good socket. So I was able to switch over to a swivel head gear wrench on the back side. Go ahead and remove that nut there. The top is loose. We just have a couple in the bottom here to get to. All right, well, our stud just snapped here, which can be typical for these here. Now, on the passenger side of the engine, we have our exhaust manifold coming down right here. There are two 15mm bolts that go through the flange and up into the flange on the exhaust manifold. We're gonna run our 15mm swivel socket and extension up between the exhaust and the oil pan in front of the starter and get that onto that rear bolt. I want to see if we can loosen that. We did spray this down liberally with some rust penetrant. And the retaining tab for the nut has broken off due to rust. So we're going to switch over to the front bolt here and see if we can loosen this one. Driver's side, we'll try and loosen this bolt here. Try the back bolt. All of the nut retainers were so rusted they just broke off. So at this point here, we're going to have to cut those studs out, which is a nut and bolt application, so it'll be easy to replace. In your case here, you want to try and find something to cut those studs out if the same thing happened. If that didn't happen, then your bolts would have come out and the nuts would have had the retaining tabs on the back side, making them reusable. Using our 15mm swivel socket and extension, we're going to go ahead, loosen and remove these two nuts holding the center pipe hanger here for the exhaust. Now we're going to wiggle that exhaust and see if we can get that flange off of here. go ahead and lower this down. And now we can slide this back. See how we disconnected that mid-mount hanger? And it gives us about 4 inches or so to go ahead and continue to work here. Using your 15mm socket, swivel and extension, we're going to come on up here to the back side of the starter. Go ahead and remove that bolt, bring that down and set that aside. On the front side of the starter, we want to come on over to the starter solenoid and we want to disconnect the upper left cable right here. This is the power. I'm going to loosen this nut. Now we're going to go up there and pull that connector off of there. Now on the lower front section of the starter, I'm going to grab our lower bolt here. Now with the bolts out, we can go ahead and lower our starter. Now on the starter solenoid, there's an electrical connector on that there. You want to go ahead and pinch that tab and pull this off. Now we can go ahead and position that starter horizontal, and we're just going to go ahead and pull that right out of the vehicle. Pull that forward. And we have our gear wrench swivel head on the back stud here. So our stud for our nut for the heat shield actually came out with our exhaust manifold stud. Just remove that. Now if you were able to remove just that nut for the heat shield, perfect. We're going to be removing our studs anyways, so that worked out fine for us. Now right behind the flange here is a 10mm bolt. We have a long extension, swivel and 10mm socket on this. So we're able to get our 1/4-inch ratchet on here. We're able to break that free. Go ahead and remove that bolt. Let's grab our heat shield. Wiggle that up and out. Set that aside. That's going to give us access to our upper bolts here. Use your 10mm socket. On the bottom side, however, I have our 10mm deep socket on our 1/4-inch ratchet. And once you break that free, you can reach underneath and spin that out. On our particular vehicle, these two front bolts here, there's a stud here on the upper and then there's a bolt on the bottom. They're 13 millimeter. So I have a 13 millimeter. I'm gonna go ahead and loosen that one there. I'm able to use a shallow on the bottom. Gives me plenty of clearance there to get to that. On our back upper stud, that is a 10 millimeter. We're using our 1/4" ratchet on that. Now with that broken free, I'm going to switch over to a gear wrench. That should allow us a little bit more room to move without having that ratchet get stuck up against the frame of the vehicle. On the front stud here, we're going to use a 13 millimeter gear wrench. Go ahead and remove that stud. With all our bolts out, go ahead and tap that manifold off, and let's go ahead and remove that. Now before we start to clean off the exhaust manifold gasket stuff off of the head here itself, I'm going to go ahead and stuff some towels into the exhaust. We don't want any gasket debris falling down inside here, so I'm just going to tuck that in there for now. Leave a little tail on it so we can go ahead and just rip that out afterwards. And let's go ahead and start cleaning the side of the cylinder head here. Now we're using a mirror here to show you one of the exhaust ports here. We're going to use a razor blade and gently we're going to just kind of get any leftover gasket material that is on here. Make sure the razor blade is laying down as much as possible. You don't want to gouge the aluminum at all on this here. Once you have all of the physical gasket material that's gone off of the cylinder head itself, we're now going to come back with a little bit of sandpaper and a block and clean that up. Now what I'm using is a block of wood that I know that has a flat finished side on it. I'm just using some sandpaper here. It's a 120 grit, and what I want to do is go up against that cylinder head and make sure it's nice and flat, and go ahead and sand down that port. Now all we're doing is we're going to clean up any of the garbage that's left on there. You can see it's coming off on here. We are not taking away any of the aluminum. We're just making sure that that surface is clean and ready to accept a new gasket. Now we're going to do this for the other 3 ports as well, making sure that it's all clean, ready for the new components. I'm going to put some solvent on a towel here. You can use a regular shop rag if you want, and clean down your surfaces after you're done doing your sanding and cleanup. And do this for all of your ports. And once you're done doing your cleanup, you want to go ahead, you can use your mirror, and these ports look very good all the way down. They're all prepped for our new gaskets. Now we want to go ahead and prep our exhaust manifold to get this back and installed. And we want to clean up the old gasket material so you can just tear off what you can grab a hold of. You want to clean up the surfaces here. This is a cast iron item, so it's okay to go ahead and use a razor blade. You can also use a power tool with a little cleaning disc or cookie or something on there to clean this up. You just want to make sure that whatever you use, you don't use anything that's going to deform the surface here. Now there's not much that we have to worry about on this here. We just have a little bit of mild gasket material. Be careful not to cut yourself if you're using a blade. Now I'm going to use a little bit of spray solvent on this. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to use our block of wood here. If this is the path that you're choosing to use a razor blade, this is going to be your next step. Use your sandpaper and go ahead and clean up the surface. Now we're using a long enough piece of wood that it will span the whole hole here and clean this up. Clean that, give it a spray. You want to continue to do this until the surface is nice and smooth without any imperfections. Do that for all four. Power tool option, use your air tool and use a soft cookie or cleaner on this here. Now remember, we're not here to take any material off the cylinder head just as much as we are to clean up the old or clean off the old gasket material. Go ahead and give that a spray down with some solvent. Go ahead and wipe it down. Do your last inspection, make sure it's all clean, and if you're satisfied with it, it's ready for installation. Before installing the manifold, don't forget to remove the towels in your exhaust. Make sure when installing your gasket that the flanged side that is sticking outward faces towards the motor, and the actual gasket material itself is facing the manifold. Everything here lines up. If you go to put it on the other way, well, it's obviously not going to line up with these here, yet the ends will. Now let's install our exhaust gasket and manifold. First thing we're going to do is take our upper forward right stud, feed that through. Make sure your gasket is in the right position. Lower that down. So I'm just going to get that stud started there. Once you have that started, take our manifold, slide that down into place. And the manifold has a slotted ear on that top section there. So go ahead and slide that up and on. I'm going to grab our second stud. Feed that up and through the gasket. All right, now that we have that second stud through, push that manifold up into place. And go ahead and get that second stud started here. Now with that stud started, that'll hold the gasket and the manifold in place. I'm going to push this up and get this forward stud in a little bit further. Now this second stud here, I'm going to run that up quite a ways. I'm not going to tighten it. I do want to have some flexibility. I don't want that gasket sealed or anything yet. But what that's doing is actually bringing up the back side of the manifold, and it's going to help hold it in position while I get the rest of these studs installed. On the upper rear The upper rear stud has this funky little design here with the 10mm on it. Now that we have all 4 of our upper studs installed, we can go ahead and install the lower ones. We were able to remove the lower 2 forward ones here underneath from up top, and then we were able to get access to the rearward ones from underneath there. Install the lower forward stud. That one there needs to have the stud extension on it for the heat shield to attach to. I'm going to go ahead and thread that one in as far as I can. And let's go ahead and get the second one back on the bottom. I'm going to try and get one of the other lower bolts installed from up top here. Now we'll install our lower rearward bolt. We have all of our exhaust manifold bolts started into the cylinder head. Now I want to go ahead and snug down all of our bolts. Now the final torque specification is going to be to 18 foot-pounds. So I'm just going to gently snug this. Might be able to reach down there and zip some of these in by hand a little bit faster. Okay, we have our 4 center studs snug. Let's go ahead and switch over and snug down the 4 outer. Now we're on our last bolt here, or stud. This is the lower rearward. Now we just want to make sure that that's snug. It's beyond hand tight, but not over tight. It is bottomed out. Go ahead and torque them down to 18 foot-pounds. Now you can continue this process for all 4 up top, and then go ahead and access the bottom ones and do the same there. Let's go ahead and get your heat shield installed. I just want to go ahead and snug down these nuts here for the heat shield. I pretty much just want these nuts to bottom out and just hold the heat shield in place. You don't have to make them super tight, but you do want them to be snug. You don't want the heat shield to rattle around. Going to default to our gear wrench in the back here again for clearance purposes, at least for the upper bolt or nut here. I'm just going to go ahead and finish up with this lower nut here for the heat shield. Okay, now our heat shield is on there good and tight. Now as we feed our starter into place, you want to pay attention to the stud here on the left and then the electrical connector port right here. We're going to have to install a wiring harness here and then over here. This one here we're not going to touch. Once we get the starter back, we can go ahead and put the gear and the snout into the bell housing. All right, now that we have the starter lined up, I'm going to take one of the bolts and I'm going to get it started on the bottom side here. Now that we have that in a few threads, let's go ahead and install the upper bolt. Now we're just going to snug this down with our hand ratchet. We're going to then snug down the forward bolt. Go ahead and torque these bolts down to 40 foot-pounds. On the top of our starter solenoid, we have two studs right here, and then on the top is the connector or the plug here. We want to connect our harness onto that. Line that up and push that on. Now once you get that connector pushed down and locked on, go ahead and push that red lock tab down into place. That'll secure that connector. The next thing you want to do is install this cable right here. Put that on there. Install the locking washer. Install the nut. Go ahead and snug that nut down. We want to go ahead and torque this to 100 inch-pounds or 8.3 foot-pounds. On the back side here, we have our exhaust hanger. We want to go ahead and get that pushed back into place. Once we have that hanging on the studs, we'll go ahead and install the nuts. on our particular vehicle. There is a ground strap on this here. Yours may or may not have that. Once you have those started, you can go ahead and tighten those down. Now we have our exhaust flange lined up with our manifold. Let's push our flange up to the exhaust manifold. And we had to source new bolts in order to assemble this because ours were in bad shape and we had to cut them out. Once we have these two in here, we're going to go ahead and install the 2 bolts on the passenger side. Once you have the 2 bolts in on one side, go ahead and repeat for the other side. Now that we have all of our exhaust manifold flange bolts installed, we want to go ahead and tighten those down evenly. Making sure that the nuts and the bolts are pretty much the same length when you're securing these here and that flange is even. And once you're done with this side here, we're going to repeat for the other side. Let's go ahead and remove our tape off of the AC ports on the firewall. We want to unhook our securing strap holding our AC components here. Remove our tape from these here. Now before installing these back into the firewall, you do want to inspect the O-rings on here. Make sure that the O-rings are in good condition. If they're torn or show any signs of wear, you want to go ahead and replace these. What we're going to do is feed our lines down inside here. I'm going to put our lower line in. Go ahead and press that in. And line up our bracket onto the bottom here. Going to install our securing nut for this. And we're just going to throw that down as far as we can just to hold this in place for now. Next, we're going to grab our upper line here, slide that over the lower, and then line this up and push this into the receiver dryer unit. Wiggle that into place. Then we can install the bolt in the center. Once you get that started a few threads, you can go ahead and snug that down. Install this bolt here. Once you have that started, I'm going to go ahead and run that down. Once you get that installed, go ahead and use your gear wrench. If you have the swivel head, it'll make it for a little bit easier for clearance. And we'll go ahead and snug that down. Go ahead and snug down this nut. Install this onto the valve cover stud. Before we drop our tray down inside, don't forget to reinstall the electrical connector to our button right here. The back side goes over the stud. Line up our front bolt over here. Let's go ahead and start getting our hardware on. I'm going to install the nut onto the stud down below. Just going to reach down along the back here. Go ahead and get that started. I'm going to take another bolt here, drop those down inside. And snug that down. Don't have to be super tight, you just want that to be bottomed out. And go to the nut on the back side here. Same thing here. Once that nut bottoms out just a little bit more, get our front bolt here. We'll install our fender well bolt right here. And we'll go ahead and snug that down. Once that bottoms out, just give it a little bit more. Just want to gently snug that into place. I'm going to take our fuse box here. I'm going to line this up onto our tabs. Should have 4 tabs. Push it down. Lock that into place. We're going to install our wire harness here. And feed this back down. We're just going to push our plastic tree back into the battery tray. We have our battery harness here. I'm just going to press that back into front there. Let's go ahead and install our battery. Install the negative battery cable. Make sure it goes down all the way. We'll tighten the bolt. After you install your battery tray, you want to go ahead and make sure that you bring your vehicle down and get the AC system recharged. Get that taken care of.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.